Hi, friends, and welcome to Life Intended, the podcast for women on a journey to take ownership of their own lives.
We're your hosts, Kelly Berry and Sadie Wackett, leaders, coaches, friends, and women on our own journeys of self-leadership.
Here, we don't believe women need to be fixed.
We believe they need to stop seeking permission and start leading lives that they choose and they design.
Life Intended is about unlearning truths that have been handed to us and start trusting your truth and living in alignment with what matters most.
Each week, we're bringing you bold, honest conversations that challenge the stories holding you back, help you uncover and step into your own voice, your own purpose, and your own power.
From inspirational guest interviews to unfiltered chats between the two of us, you'll leave every episode with insights, tools, and the kind of encouragement that sticks.
This is your space to wake up, break free, and lead the life you were always meant to live. Let's get into it.
Hi, welcome back. Sadie and I are here today to talk about another topic that we have been having a lot of conversations about with each other and with other women. And it's something that Sadie and I feel like affects so many people and is just not talked about enough. And that is relationships. I think over season 1, I talked to a few people that I would consider like relationship experts. And one of the things that I kept saying was, I think for a long time we've known how important it is to work on our physical health and focus on our nutrition. And in recent years, it's become apparent that our mental health is really important and that the next step or the next like circle that we're stepping into is relational health because it impacts our lives so much, but we don't really, there's not as many tools, there's just not as many resources teaching us or, informing us about what good relational health looks like and how we can take responsibility for having good relationships in our lives and what that looks like. So, Sadie, welcome. I'm excited for this conversation today.
Kelly. Yeah, me too. Just for the listeners, I think it's probably helpful to set the context in the sense that this is probably going to be a bit more like teachy rather than conversational. And that's because I think it's helpful to share some of the tools that we have that can help people in this area. We'll chat about this because it's been on our minds, but I might be doing a bit more of the talking.
Yeah,
So just to set the scene in that way. All
sounds good.
right.
Let's
Yeah,
let's go.
let's dive in. All right. So yeah, as Kelly said, this is a theme or a topic we picked because, in the coaching work that I do and also in the women's groups that we've been holding recently, and those that I actually participate in, not as a facilitator, but as a participant, this topic of relationships, most often it's personal relationships like partners or spouses or kids, but it is also professional relationships as well, like my boss or my coworker, etc., and also my friends. So this keeps coming up, and I wanted to use this as an opportunity to, first of all, normalize like the experience that we have around relationships and the impact on us. And then secondly, help give some framework and context to what we can do to influence those in a way that's more sort of empowering and helpful to us. And that really is the word I want to underscore at this point, is how we can empower ourselves. This really isn't about how we can change other people. That's the whole point of this. It's about how we can change ourselves and our own approach to create a better impact in those relationships. Because, the emotional toll of difficult relationships is very hard, and it's experienced by everybody. It's universal. So just to kick off with then, so from the moment that we're born as babies, that's when our attachments are formed with our parents, with our caregivers, with our siblings, maybe with teachers, with friends, etc. And that's where we start to build very early on our subconscious answers to questions like, am I worthy of love? Is it safe to express myself, etc.? And over time, and especially in close adult relationships, we begin to define ourselves in relation to others. So, who I am as a daughter, who I am as a sister, who I am as a girlfriend, wife, who I am as a mom, or who I am as a co-worker or a business partner or a friend. And again, it's happening subconsciously. So without noticing, we may become in those relationships, we may become peacekeepers, we may become caretakers, we may become the responsible one or the one who's depended on or relied upon. And so, what happens when we're in difficult relationships is we as women, generally, because of the conditioning that we have grown up with, we may either overfunction, which is we start to take on too much responsibility. We try and manage what everything feels like and what everyone feels like, or we underfunction, which then is us shrinking ourselves. We won't speak up for ourselves. We'll keep the peace. We'll avoid conflict, and we'll gradually, over time, just disconnect from our authentic self, like the self that we really feel we are deep inside. And when it comes to like challenging relationships where there might be conflict, whether that's with a spouse, whether that might be, your kids or a boss, especially, our nervous system can't tell the difference between what's physical danger and emotional danger. That's how our brains have evolved. So when somebody who we depend on or who we look to for validation is critical, or they're distant from us, or they're unpredictable, then our nervous system is going to go into fight or flight, or for freeze. So we might become defensive and fight back, or we might withdraw and avoid conversation. And we might shut down, become helpless, or we might start to become overly pleasing. And in the process of that, we just kind of lose ourselves. So I guess that's the first thing I wanted to share, is that it's not to be experiencing these things in relationships isn't a form of weakness or that something's kind of wrong, you're broken. It's just natural. It's your body trying to protect you. It's a natural response. And so that what I would like to offer is a couple of tools and ways in which we can help women disentangle themselves from this sense of over responsibility and helplessness by identifying what's mine to own, and what's mine to kind of govern, what's theirs, what's the other person's, and what's shared between us, what's theirs to carry, not mine to carry. Does that make sense?
It really does. And I think, it's so aligned with everything else that we've talked about is just the awareness to be able to step back and look at these relationships and even the like, what kind of feeling am I getting when I'm around this person or communicating with this person, and letting that guide you to kind of what you're talking about. Like, do I feel unsafe, or am I over functioning or under functioning, or and just kind of like stepping back to listen to yourself a little bit, because that will tell you a lot about what the underlying, I guess, like problem is, and then kind of whose it is to address. And I know you'll get into this, but like, then what?
Yeah.
Then what needs to happen? Like, is this something that you can work on? Is this something that you just need to step away from? And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck.
Yeah. And thanks for bringing up the kind of emotional response, because often we just become a bit numb to it. If we're experiencing the same difficult feelings in a relationship, it becomes like wallpaper. We just kind of don't see it. We just accept that that's the way it is, and we just
Mhm.
exist with that.
Yeah. I think I've used this word in my own life, but our tolerance
Hmm.
goes way up. And,
Yeah.
like, what we are willing to tolerate, we
Yeah.
just keep bumping up against that instead of stopping to be like, why am I just continuing to tolerate more when
Yeah.
it's just like wrecking me, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, and that, I'm going to just go back to our socialization as well, because depending on how you grew up, like the family dynamics that you grew up in, if we're talking about parents and their relationship with one another, I mean, you know, I think that other people might be able to relate to this, but if you look at how a marriage is supposed to be based on what we grew up with. Well, a marriage is supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to be argumentative. It's supposed to be, challenging, full of compromise. The mother does this, the father does that in traditional environments. But those are dynamics we might have grown up with. But is that the choice we want to make for ourselves for relationships going forward? And I think, generationally, if we look back, I don't know I mean, how much affection it has been shown with our parents, between our parents, or intimacy, or just genuine connection that helps us as we're growing up see that that's what relationships should be made of or could be made of. And so we're just repeating patterns that we've grown up with. All right, so I'm going to dive into there's a couple of frameworks or tools, if you like, ways of thinking about this that I think can be helpful for people. So the first one is, and I want you to try and visualize those three concentric circles. And the inner circle is ourselves. The middle circle is the relationship, so what's shared between these two people. And the outer circle is the other person, the things that are not yours, not shared, they are theirs completely. So in the inner circle, it's things like, what do I think? What do I feel? How do I behave? What do I need? What do I value? What are the boundaries that I hold? What is the meaning that I make of this? What do I choose? And those are all things that, unless we stop and ask ourselves those questions, they could pass us by very easily and we can make a lot of assumptions about them. So that in this inner circle is where our personal power is held, because those are the things we can control and we can influence. The middle circle, it's the relationship dynamics. So what patterns have we created between us? So if I think about, shared responsibilities in the house, what patterns have we created? So I'm the one who always makes dinner. They're the one who puts the kids to bed, for example. Or what patterns have we created around, fighting or congratulating each other or sharing responsibilities for things? And then there's the communication habits. How do we speak to each other? Are we generous and thoughtful and patient in how we speak to each other, or are we quick and judgmental and angry when we speak to one another and we communicate with one another? How have we set out our mutual expectations? So if I think about, maybe it's my daughter, like my expectation for her is that she's 7, that she will brush her teeth by herself and that she will get herself dressed. She doesn't do that. She expects me to be with her, help her get her clothes out and everything. And that's very frustrating for me. And it can end up in, me sometimes losing my temper. But those are the patterns we're creating together. So that's where the kind of energy goes. And that's also based on like what history we carry with each other. So how did we grow up together? What's the baggage we each carry? And then in the outer circle, it's theirs. So if I continue with my 7-year-old daughter, it's her moods, it's her choices, it's what she believes about things, whether she should have to clean her teeth before she goes to school or whether she should have to get dressed before she has breakfast. They're triggers. So what lights them up, what sets them off, it's theirs. It's their behavior and it's their willingness to change. And obviously this is probably, relatable when we think about like spouse relationships or partnerships like that. And so, just to kind of apply this, most of us spend the majority of our time in that outer circle trying to manage someone else's emotions, someone else's reactions, someone else's decisions. If they did this, if my husband cleared the table without being asked, then I would feel, you know, happy, relaxed. If my kid cleaned her teeth without me having to ask her 5 times, then I'd feel a sense of calm. But true self-leadership really begins in the inner circle. This is again where I said our power lies. It's not in fixing or controlling or being responsible for somebody else's experience. It's within our own ability to manage our own experience of that relationship dynamic. And so managing our expectations around that. And the middle circle is where we need to start to be very aware of this kind of pattern or this dance that's going on between the two of us. we might not be able to change it, especially not instantly, but certainly if we can name it and we can then pause it and we can start to shift it. So yeah, again, I'm just going to pause there, Kelly, and just see if that, how relatable that is for you in terms of how you think about some of the relationships in your life.
Yeah, I think that that is just a really great model to think about, first of all. But, one of the things as you were talking about it that is just so relatable and I think is really at the root of a lot of the, discomfort that we feel in our relationships is expectations. And so I'll just give like a personal example of this than something that I went through. So Nick and I we've been married 18 years, so this is quite a while ago. But before we got married, we went through like a short session of premarital counseling. And one of the exercises that we did, it was so simple, but it was like a list of 15 things. And it was like, which of these things did your mother do? And which of these things did your father do? And they were things like take out the trash, pay the bills, hang pictures on the wall, do the grocery shopping. And so we each went through and just said, which of our parents did these things? And then we met together in session and we talked through it. And the result is just trying to help you avoid unmet expectations because of the experiences that you're bringing to the relationship. So if I come into the marriage and I'm like, well, my dad always took out the trash, and Nick comes into the marriage and he's like, my mom always took out the trash. We may never discuss whose responsibility it is to take out the trash, but we're both resentful to the other one because they don't know automatically that they're responsible for this chore. And so I think that, if we can think about where we're feeling this like friction in our lives, is it around a lot of unmet expectations or unspoken expectations? So that's kind of one thing. And then the other thing that, and this is a big struggle for me, is sometimes, yeah, and you mentioned it in your example, like, can my husband clear the table without being asked? It's like we hold on to this belief that if they can just read our minds, and this is spouses, this is friends, this is, coworkers, this is everybody. If they can just read our minds, you know, don't they just know what's important to me? Don't they just know what I want? And I think that that's just like unnecessary burden. It's like, what if we can ask ourselves, like, what is so wrong with having to speak our expectations? What are we afraid of that's keeping us from doing that? And I'll relate this to my own, like, kind of personal relationship with achievement. I have a hard time asking for help because I feel like if I get help, it wasn't mine. I got help along the way. And I think there's been times in my life where I've felt the same way about expectations in relationship. Like, if I have to tell somebody what I want from them, then it's not, it's not right or it's not like good. And that's just not the case. Like we are we are free to express what we need and what we want. And, then it tells us a lot if the other person isn't willing to or won't do those things. So, I had a lot of thoughts going on in my head around that, but I think that those are just kind of some good examples, like, what are those unspoken
Yeah,
expectations? And then, like, what is our resistance to speak
yeah.
our needs and wants?
And I think just it's such a good point. And building on the topic of expectations, I think then we start, because our brains are meaning making machines, we start to make meaning of the fact that they haven't taken the trash out in this example. And, you know, we might start to think, well, if they loved me, they'd take the trash out. A good partner should know how to organize a house and take trash out. I've got, very similar example. Flooring, we had to have some flooring put in, and we've noticed there's some gaps in it where it was put in. And in my mind, this is just me internally ruminating on it. Well, Alex needs to sort that out. Alex needs to sort that out. Alex needs to. And then I'm kind of, well, why am I getting so frustrated about this? Why don't I sort that out? So
Mhm.
this is a really good analogy as well. And I find it really helpful to use myself. If we imagine for a moment that we're a car, I'm an Audi, my husband is I don't know, a Ford. I have an operating manual for how I work. It's mine. It's got all uh, the measurements and instructions for how I operate. And that's been built for my lifetime. This operating manual has been structured and it's very comprehensive, and it's exactly what I need to operate well. Alex has a different operating manual. It is developed to ensure that he, as a Ford, runs smoothly at all times, and he understands all the like mechanics behind what he needs. I can't hand my operating manual to him and expect him to follow all those instructions and run smoothly, because it's full of different things. It's full of different beliefs, it's full of different expectations, it's full of different values. Where this becomes really important is that we recognize we each have a different manual, and that when we overlap them together, there may be some consistency. We may have shared values around certain things like parenting or friendships or the importance of career, but there's going to be other things that we are very different in each of our operating manuals, such as how we view the need to rest and relax, or stability, safety versus kind of growth and change. And both manuals are fine for ourselves. However, when we come together in partnership, that's when we need to take a look at where they overlap. And it's exactly the same example that you gave around your kind of pre-marriage counseling, like calling it out, being intentional about saying, well, this is how I feel about roles and responsibilities. How do you? So I think, that's really where we can come to ourselves as individuals, and we can start to understand like where we are able to trust our own feelings, or maybe where we're deferring permission and we're waiting for the permission from somebody else. Like, I can't do this unless they change. Well, we might be waiting a very long time. And so there's an opportunity here for us to kind of reclaim our own power by just understanding, first of all, what our operating manual is telling us, and maybe being curious around what their operating manual is telling them.
Yeah. That last statement, like remaining curious, I think that that is so important. And, to go back to what you said at the very beginning, like relationships are hard and it's okay. If you think about, especially in partnerships or in marriage, like you are sharing your life with somebody, that is a hard thing to do, is like merge two people with two different operating manuals together and expect that to be like good and cohesive. But if you can maybe like shift the way that you think about it, and you're not trying to merge these manuals into one. The beauty of relationships is that you do have two different manuals, and there's probably is some overlap, and the differences are what help us continue to grow and see things differently. And I think that staying curious about it and being willing to change and grow together is really kind of, I think, what makes those relationships really beautiful. It's not like you're trying to come in and change somebody. You're trying to come in and see, like, how can you navigate life together, and become the best versions of
Yeah.
yourselves alongside each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's, the notion of curiosity, and also to the extent we can remove judgment from our thoughts as well. So removing like this moral weight of their behavior, the other person's behavior. In the case of the trash, it might not be because that person's unwilling to take the trash out. So they're not necessarily a bad person for not doing it. They are just wired differently. So it's not like the intent behind it may not be bad. It's just that they're wired differently, and they don't necessarily have the capacity to be able to match your expectations. So, yeah, I think it's, and even if I think about working relationships as well, the same things apply. If you're a leader of a team and you are getting super frustrated with what they're doing or not doing, it's like how quickly are we applying kind of moral judgment to their behaviors, rather than kind of trying to just think about how they're wired, what's driving
Hmm.
them, what they measure success by,
Hmm.
and being able to kind of break that down in a more granular way so that nobody's operating from assumptions. We're operating
Hmm.
from a place of knowledge and understanding, shared understanding. And that allows for just a lot more. A, it allows for a lot more kind of transparent communication, but B, when we have to make decisions about things, whether it's a difficult leadership decision about needing to develop somebody or somebody's no longer fit for the role, or it's a bigger decision around, we can do it from a place of knowledge and insight rather than a reaction from a feeling that we've got, which is
Hmm.
uncomfortable. And if we remove ourselves from that relationship, our discomfort's going to go away. Well, it might do temporarily, but if we haven't been able to establish the mechanics behind how the relationship dynamics work, I can guarantee you'd move into the next relationship and experience very similar things.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And to that point, that goes beyond just relationships. That's really the grass is greener mentality, and you just never get there because you're you're just continuing to stay in motion without like addressing the things that are in motion alongside you. So
That's all I have for now
yeah.
in the time that we have. But you can tell it's a topic that's, I mean, it's rich and it's universal.
Hmm. It really is. And I'm sure in some way, shape, or form we'll address it maybe from a different angle again in the future. But I think that those were two really helpful models, the circles, the operating manual. I know recently in some of our resets and things you talked about that as it relates to like value sets as well. And so I think that those are just good frameworks for people to use when, maybe they're coming up against some of those feelings of friction to help them work through and maybe approach a situation, relationship,
Yeah,
something in their lives a little bit differently the
yeah.
next time they do so.
I would definitely say this is I guess equipment, or this is knowledge I would have loved to have had earlier in my life. Like, as I was leaving high school, going through college, going into the workplace, this would have equipped me so well to handle situations.
Well, this is great. Thank you, Sadie, and we will talk again soon.
We will. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Life Intended.
If something from this episode landed with you, stirred something up, or gave you a new perspective, share it, tag us, leave a review. That's how this work reaches more women who really need it.
Life Intended is more than just a podcast. It's a movement back to self-trust, personal power, and living with intention.
We're just getting started.
So keep showing up, keep tuning in. If you're ready for more support on your path, head to lifeintended.co. We've got tools, community, and programs to meet you where you are. Until next time.